Hey everyone, Chris Carter here on the North Shore Drive podcast. We've got Adam Bittner on today. We want to talk about the Jalen Ramsey situation. Should the Steelers be bigger players in trying to acquire a former all-pro cornerback like Ramsey to add to their secondary? We'll talk about that. Moves the Ravens are making to go all in this season. Should the Steelers be trying to keep pace? And we'll talk about how protective Omar Khan should be of those 2026 picks where they're looking to get a quarterback. We'll talk about that all here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive Podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive Podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Adam Bittner. And as always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive Podcast, as well as the daily content that we put out here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder and Associates. Not only do they help you when you're injured in an accident, they also help you with workers' compensation. Call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. As I said before, we're joined by the man himself, Adam Bittner. If you don't know Adam, you better know Adam. He's the guy that handles all things behind the scenes. You usually see him when we're doing like bigger videos and things that we got to get all hands on deck, like the NFL draft, when he's dealing with me yelling about Derek Harmon. Adam, welcome back to the North Shore Drive Podcast.
It's awesome to be here, Chris. Ray, Brian, vacation time, so you end up being stuck with me, but I'm excited to talk about unexpectedly newsy Monday, I think.
Hey, just a little bit, so some things happening here and there. Let's talk about the Jalen Ramsey situation. It's that time of the year where we get to speculate about things. No big news right away for the Steelers, but Jalen Ramsey, cornerback, of course, with the Dolphins right now. He's been an all-pro in his time. He's 31 years old this season. He's an experienced veteran, but there's some tension going on with the Dolphins, and there's talk about them maybe wanting to trade him. So people are looking who could be the best trade partners to go get Jalen Ramsey. Now, the biggest name that I've seen that keeps popping up are the Los Angeles Rams. Of course, Ramsey's been with them in his career, and that could be interesting to see how that plays out. But also got to note that the Steelers have been rumored to be in these conversations. Now, the Steelers have not expressed this themselves, and there's always got to be careful about what you're hearing in this realm. But Adam, let's take out the whether or not we have with the thing about the Steelers is real. Let's just explore, should the Steelers be players in the market, or bigger players in the market for Jalen Ramsey right now?
I think for me, Chris, it always comes down to price when we talk about these trades. If you can get a discount on a disgruntled guy, if you can drive the price down and you can get him for a later round draft pick or something like that, then sure, I think you want to explore adding guys like that to the team. But I don't think I'd give up any premium capital. And I don't think Omar Khan would either, just considering how things kind of played out with the Brandon Ayuk situation last year. I wouldn't imagine this would be nearly as protracted as that was. I felt like we talked about that for the whole summer. But I think it's a similar idea of, you want to stay in that conversation. And if the price comes down, be ready to pounce to bolster the secondary. Because I think they have some pieces there. I think they really like Cory Trice Jr. Probably more than I think the general public does. But, if you can bolster it in some way, you should always be looking to make those moves. It just doesn't seem front burner for me.
That's the thing here, is that for me, this isn't. I know that it's a very attractive move to a lot of Steelers fans. Jalen Ramsey's been a big player in the NFL for many years. He's been a thorn on the side of the Steelers for some years. But when you look at what it would take to get him, not only just the draft pick, but also the cap space that he would require, because right now he's a $16.6 million hit on the on the Dolphins. That goes up to $25 million next in 2026, $26.8 million in 2027. And there's a lot of money tied up in it. And the contract is not exactly built in a way that's typical for what the Steelers would like to do outside of like the last year of the contract that they have here, when he'd be 34 years old as a cornerback in the NFL. So when I look at that, if you were to acquire him and the Dolphins didn't eat up a bunch of his contract, which they could, but if you acquire him and they were to pass on more of that money, the Steelers would have to make some cap space moves. Now TJ Watt extension is probably going to open up more space naturally. They could, restructure some other deals and make things happen. But the Steelers have $18.8 million in cap space, and typically they like to hold on to anywhere between $8 to $10 million going into the season, just in case they have an emergency where such and such got hurt. We got to get another position here or there. And so I just wonder if Jalen Ramsey works out in that front. But also, to your point, the Steelers, I think, might look at cornerback. Yes, cornerback needs to improve this season, but they paid $10 million to get Darius Slay. This is a big prove-it year for Joey Porter Jr. And like you said, Cory Trice is a guy I think that they're really intrigued to see if he can have his comeuppance. The only way I could think that the Jalen Ramsey thing would work is if it was like a 6th-round pick or a 5th-round pick, and the Steelers do have a large number of day 3 picks going into next season with the projected comp picks that they have lined up for them. And that's something that they do have in their favor. But I just look at this and I'm like, is this the position that you want to be doing this for and creating a space for? Because if you trade for and you take on Jalen Ramsey's salary cap hit, that's pretty much it. Like you're not, there's no big wide receiver 2 that you're trading for. There's no other, big playmaker you're getting. That's the big move that you're getting. And so now you're saying, okay, Jalen Ramsey, where do we want you to play? Do we want you to play in the slot and just bench Beanie Bishop? Do we want you to take over for Slay or Porter? I think that could be an interesting conundrum for the Steelers. And hey, I think having Jalen Ramsey would be a good problem to have, but the other things to figure it out might just be too much of an obstacle for Omar Khan to want to make this happen.
Yeah, I think the needs are, and this feels a little, because it takes one injury, right? I mean, if Joey Porter Jr. goes down, then we're in a completely different conversation. And maybe that's the motivation here is, yes, you can line things up if everyone's healthy and say, oh, do you really need this guy at that cap number? And maybe they're saying, well, we think someone's going to get hurt and we think we're going to need some solid production there. So I think that's part of the conversation, but he's also not that guy that I necessarily want to build a defense around at this stage of his career. I pulled his PFF numbers up. He has 76.9 grade, which is solid. His numbers are solid across the board, but they're not like shut down Revis Island in his prime type of stuff. So if you're going to pay a guy $25 million into his 30s, that's what you're looking for, right? And I don't know that is who he is. And of course, you can kind of always restructure things, but I think it's maybe it's one of those situations you monitor going into camp and into the season. And if someone goes down, if you have a Cory Trice like injury, like you did in training camp a couple of years ago, then maybe that ups the urgency for you and you take it a little bit more seriously as events require.
I think that's the thing, is playing it by ear. And this is the biggest thing that I think the Steelers are monitoring. They are like everyone was saying, oh, they're interested in this player. Oh, they're interested in that player. The Steelers are kicking the tires around the NFL like all teams are right now, because what they're doing is everyone's kind of saying, okay, what does this team got? What does this team got? And they're trying to gauge what would it take to get, like, for example, when the rumor about Chris Olave went out. Yes, the Steelers are probably calling about Chris Olave to see what the Saints would want for him, because they're a team that are in a bad cap situation. They are not built to win this season, not even win, be competitive in their division. And Chris Olave could be available, but they're not calling for trade for him right now. They're calling to say, okay, what would it cost to get you? So now, the way I envision it, not that I've been inside the Steelers front office itself, but the way I envision it is Omar Khan has a board somewhere where they've stacked up all, like, hey, every team, every target that they have, the Steelers could want to get if the Steelers prioritize wide receiver, corner, whatever trade they want to make. And now they say, okay, what is the best value that we have as far as that, and who should we target the most? And then even with that, they're going to wait until training camp, because like you said, it's not just if the Steelers lose somebody. What if someone else loses somebody? What if say, the Commanders, this is a big year for them because they want to strike while the iron's hot with Jaden Daniels, and they're one of their top linebacker, Bobby Wagner. He's old. He goes down, and they're like, hey, Steelers, you got Cole Holcomb. He's a pretty good vet. He's been here. What would it take for that? And then you could say, okay, let's work out a package. And then you could use that to get a corner or a receiver off them. Not Terry McLaurin. I don't think they're ever giving that guy up. But I am saying that I do think that what the Steelers are going to wait for, because, I mean, again, that's what happened with Joe Hayden, right? Joe Hayden couldn't come to a number with the Browns. They cut him in the middle of training camp. The Steelers said, we'll take that. Thank you. And then you were ready because you hadn't made a move prematurely to be that would have prevented that. So I think that's where Omar Khan and the Steelers front office, they are patient. They have surveyed the land. They have checked out all the options. Now it's about just waiting for the right moment to make that move, and that probably won't happen until teams even get into preseason and we start to see teams start to have their own issues to work on.
Yeah, and I think maybe even more than having a list of targets, I think they probably have a list of assets that they're willing to give up to acquire these things. I think they're communicating. If they have that conversation with the Saints, that the Saints are asking, okay, well, what are you willing to give up? The Steelers probably say, well, this is what we have available. And sometimes, GMs buckle from that and they give up more than they say in that initial conversation. But I think we learned from Omar Khan that he's willing to sit when he feels comfortable with what he has. And I would say, if you want to use the Brandon Ayuk situation last year as, an informative example, I think the Steelers are less desperate to make a move at that position this year at corner than they were at receiver last year. So I would be surprised if, whatever the ask is on Omar Khan's side, that he moves off of that to make something like this happen.
I'm right with you there. I don't think that move happens unless something crazy goes down. But again, that's why Jalen Ramsey is not going to happen right now. But maybe something could happen somewhere in the NFL that gets the Steelers to move quickly during training camp. Well, the Ravens did make a move last week for a veteran cornerback, and that was Jaire Alexander. I want to talk about that and whether the Steelers should be keeping pace with what the Ravens are doing. That's next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Adam Bittner. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder and Associates. You know, they also do workers' compensation. When you've been hurt on the job, you need to know who decides when you're better, who decides when your treatment's over, and who decides when your benefits are over. The answer might surprise you. It's the insurance company's doctors. How does that make you feel? If the answer is not great, it's because you need someone that has your back. No one has your back like Edgar Snyder and Associates. Call Edgar Snyder and Associates today at 1-800-94-EDGAR because they'll fight for the workers' compensation rights that you deserve. Again, that's Edgar Snyder and Associates at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Adam Bittner. Adam, the Ravens have won the division the last year. The Ravens have kind of been on top of things in the AFC North for a little bit, even though the Steelers have had some success against them in the last 10 or so times these teams have faced. The Ravens have kind of just been that team in the AFC North. The Bengals had their brief moment, but I really think Lamar Jackson, they've come into their own. But of course, the Ravens have not cracked the formula to get into the Super Bowl. The Ravens have won the division the last 2 years. The Bengals won it the 2 years before that. But this is a year where it seems like the Ravens are going all in. This past week, they added Jaire Alexander, the Packers cornerback who was cut and had missed 20 games in the last 2 seasons, but was a big name on the free agent market once he hit it. This also adds on to them going and getting DeAndre Hopkins to pair with, say, Flowers in the wide receiver room. They kept Rashad Bateman. They kept Derrick Henry. Their offensive line's pretty much intact. They paid guys like Nnamdi Madubuike, Roquan Smith, and they added, I thought, some really good pieces in the draft by getting Malachi Starks as a safety out of Georgia to pair with Kyle Hamilton. And I also like their edge rusher addition of Mike Green and he's a backup for them. There's so many things that I like about what the Ravens have been doing, and they're basically loading up right now. But Adam, the Steelers, I feel like part of this could be just the reason they're not making all these types of moves because they're not in the window that the Ravens are. I'm not sure how many more years the Ravens have with this current crew. Lamar Jackson will be fine to be around, but the crew that they have assembled around Lamar Jackson is a good one. But I think that the Ravens are in desperation mode because they know that like Derrick Henry only got a couple more years maybe of being this Derrick Henry, and eventually they're going to have to pay some more of these guys, and it's going to lead them to losing some of this crew.
Yeah, and I think, we're going to talk about 2026 here, I think, in the next segment. I think the Steelers would be wise to keep an eye on 2026 and beyond, because I think you could be well positioned if you figure out the quarterback situation and with some of these young guys that you have on this roster to maybe assume that role of favorite in the AFC North. Of course, it's going to be difficult with Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson still around for the foreseeable future, but I think that kind of seems like the play for the Steelers. And I think if you're going to see them make moves to load up and get into an arms race, it's going to be if they feel like they've seen enough from Aaron Rodgers, either in training camp or in September before the trade deadline. That's to me when they start to make moves. I think if you try to match the Ravens move for move right now and you don't feel nearly as confident in your roster for justifiable reasons, then you're setting yourself back for those future seasons. Now, if Aaron Rodgers comes out and is on fire, maybe even to the point that you're having conversations with him about 2026, then I think that changes the tenor of things. But we're not there yet, and I think you risk running into having the season play out the way it did a year ago. If you're just not quite as good as the Ravens, and you're making moves to try to keep up anyway, then you're robbing your future to end up right back where you were before. And I think that would be bad business for the Steelers.
I think that's the thing here, right? Is that the Ravens are going all in right now because this is their window. The Steelers are trying to set up their window. They're trying to do what the Ravens really kind of did the few years leading up to getting Lamar Jackson in position as the franchise quarterback. And listen, I think that's part of we got to see how this stuff plays out, right? We don't know if this offensive line is going to be an elite offensive line in the future. We don't know if the defensive line additions they've made of late are going to turn into that either. But I think you have to, it's kind of funny when teams say this, trust the process. But that's kind of what the Steelers have to do right now. Is because if you sell out your rebuild right now to try to just keep pace with the team that has everything going for them right now, you're putting yourself instantly in a situation that you are automatically disadvantaged for a chance to be the underdog who takes has 1 or 2 years to try to overcome the team that's in the better position. What the Steelers are working to do is they want to be the team in the better position. That's kind of what the Ravens did. You think back at how the Steelers for some years, they ran the AFC North for a bit, and we're kind of taking control of things there. They run it in 2014, 2016, 2017, and then Lamar Jackson showed up, and then that was kind of when things started to go upside down on the Steelers. When the Ravens won it in 2018, 2019, the Steelers got it back in 2020, but the Ravens kind of took their lumps for some while, and we're like, okay, and remember, if it wasn't for Lamar Jackson, John Harbaugh was going to be let go. Like, they were going to have a complete rebuild and everything else was going to go down. And then Lamar Jackson came in and really saved Harbaugh's career and also made the Ravens a serious threat. And I think that's where the Steelers are right now. They're trying to put themselves in the position where, hey, Ravens, good job winning the division, but if you don't capitalize on this soon, the Steelers are going to be a lot more dangerous if they hit on quarterback the way that they want to hit on quarterback in next year's draft.
And this is what frustrates people, Chris, because the Steelers are doing that while having these conversations about TJ Watt, who's going into his 30s, while you're paying so much to Aaron Rodgers. I know there's a lot of fans who don't like that move. Even though I think there was a honeymoon period there in OTAs, I'm sure that will be in training camp. I think some people are warming to the move that was made, but there are some that still flat out hate it, and they wish that the Steelers would just tear down a little bit, take their lumps fully, maybe have some losing seasons, get some high draft picks in here. And that's not in the Steelers' DNA. They're always going to try to win to the maximum extent every year without gambling too much. And so I think there is room for criticism of the Steelers in that regard. If that is their plan and if that is their strategy, why are you dedicating the resources to some of these older guys? Why aren't you adding even more draft capital than we've talked about before? But regardless, even with what they're doing, I think that there is some level of they're saying, we think we can do this. We think we can be a pretty solid team. If the chips fall right, if injuries around the NFL happen, you can have a 2005 type of run like the Steelers did to the Super Bowl. It seems like they're always trying to build the team for that, Chris, and then get a little better each year. It's just very funny to me that this team has won 6 Super Bowls, and they always seem to be modeling the worst of those 6 teams when trying to build a Super Bowl winner, at least this last handful of years. But yes, I think they are looking at more upside in the future if you get that right guy at quarterback. Maybe all these other issues we're talking about fade a lot more when you have a guy like Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow who can hide some of your deficiencies elsewhere.
I think that's the thing, is you want to get the guy that can hide those deficiencies, but also can just play really well with them. If you don't have those deficiencies, I think that's the dream that everyone's trying to acquire, right? They want to have the franchise quarterback on the rookie deal, like the Bengals did for some time with Joe Burrow, but have a really good defense paired with a really good offense that, you're in the perfect window, and then you can spend and be aggressive because you're not paying a franchise quarterback money. And that's the thing, is the Ravens and the Bengals, they're out of those windows now. Both Burrow and Jackson getting major contracts that are up there with the NFL as far as being the most expensive. The Steelers are trying to set up their chance to get there, but what could stand in the way is if they are that aggressive. And I want to talk to Adam next about how aggressive the Steelers should be in trying to get talent that could fill their roster out, while also trying to protect the right picks in the 2026 NFL draft, where we know the Steelers are going to be looking heavily at trading up for a franchise quarterback. We'll talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Adam Bittner. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by UFC Gym Pittsburgh. If you're looking for a way to challenge your body and sharpen your mind, step into something more than just a workout. Welcome to the brand new Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy at UFC Gym. Here, it's not just about training, it's about living up to the values of honor, discipline, and respect. Whether you're a total beginner or you're leveling up your skills, you'll be guided through a structured program led by a third-degree black belt instructor who builds confidence, strength, flexibility, and real technique. Head down to the UFC Gym at the Waterfront or Market Square to learn about the exclusive 3-month introductory package today, only at UFC Gym Pittsburgh. We're also brought to you by Boss. Boss Menswear has reached icon status for its tailoring, but offers more than just the perfect suit. The collections also feature casual and athleisure pieces, presenting a complete wardrobe for fast-paced modern lifestyles. Tailoring and sportswear are brought together in a look that is ready for whatever the day may hold. Check out Boss today with all the different pieces they have available. Boss is now open in Ross Park Mall with a selection of menswear prices. Boss, check out them today. Back here in the North Shore Drive podcast, Chris Carter, Adam Bittner with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Now, Adam, let's explore this question I talked about. I kind of teased there. The Steelers' current draft picks in 2026. Technically, if you look them up right now, you'd have a first-round pick, a second-round pick, 2 third-round picks with their trade away of Jordan Pickens, a 4th, a 5th, a 6th, and a 7th. But everyone's done the calculations for the comp picks because of how they handled free agency this past year, with them allowing a lot of players to hit free agency, them not signing too many big name players for big money. The Steelers are projected to get an additional 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th round picks, which would give them about, projecting into next year, as long as they don't trade away some of these picks, a 1st, a 2nd, 3 third-round picks, 2 4th-round picks, 2 5ths, 2 6ths, and 2 7ths. That's a decent amount of picks, especially in from late day 2 to early day 3 of the draft. And some people are wondering, is that going to be enough to trade up and go get the quarterback they really want? And I think that's why whenever we talk about trades, that I kind of tell people to hold on a second, because they're like, oh, they should go get Terry McLaurin. Oh, they should go get this big name player. If you're getting a big name player who is going to cost you something significant, like a 2nd round pick, like they traded away for DK Metcalf, that's the ammunition you need to go trade up and get that quarterback, or at least to be part of the package to trade up for that quarterback. And that's why I think that if Omar Khan is going to trade for someone in the next week or so, or the next few months or so, it's going to be using some of these extra day 3 picks, and maybe not even a 4th, maybe it would be a 5th or a 6th or a 7th round pick.
Yeah, I would say 2 things, Chris. I'd say number one, if you're going to make these moves, you want to do it like you did with DK Metcalf, of you trade for him, but then you sign him and he's going to be a fixture of this offense for a long time. It's a 5-year deal for DK Metcalf. So even if, things go sideways this year, it seems like they're allowing for that possibility. You've got a young quarterback that can come in and have 4 years with a weapon like DK Metcalf. And so I think that's the type of move you want to make if you're the Steelers, is someone that's going to be here for a while, probably on the offensive side of the ball. The other thing I'd say is this quarterback class is so interesting in that I think people agree that it's better, certainly, than this past season's. With Shedeur falling and some of these guys falling into the late rounds, kind of reminiscent of 2021, but we don't know how much better it's going to be. Right. We know Arch Manning is probably going to be that guy that everyone's looking at 1-1, but some people think Drew Allar is the number 2 quarterback in this class. And what I'd say is as a Penn State grad, I love that Drew Allar's coming back, and I love what he might be able to do for Penn State, but I don't know what kind of NFL prospect he's going to be yet. And I think you can say that about a lot of these guys, Nico Iamaleava, Lenoris Sellers, Cade Klubnik. These guys are solid college players, but are they going to be really solid pro prospects as we're sitting here a year from now? And so I think you don't want to give up that draft capital, because you may not have to move up to number 2, number 3, number 4. You might have to move up to right where you did with Ben Roethlisberger. Number 11 is where they took him. Back in 2004. So you have the ammunition to do that, I think. I don't know if you have the ammunition to move all the way up to 1-1 and get that quarterback and get that guy. who's going to go in the top 5, but you do have the ammunition to maybe go there. So, unless it's going to be a weapon that is going to be around for a long time, I'd sit tight. I'd see how the college season plays out. I'd see how the trade deadline plays out and kind of look at it that way.
I think that's the right approach, because the Steelers keeping your options open for whatever could happen with this class that you're very excited about is the best way. And listen, if it turns out that, at the end of this upcoming college, because you got to see how these guys even play this year, right? Because there's guys that you weren't sure, like Tyler Shuck wasn't on people's boards going into last. No one was talking about him as a guy that, he could be the real dude last year. There's always somebody that creeps up, gets in the conversation. I hadn't heard the name Jackson Dart before I started looking into the draft class, last year. And so there's always that person that could creep up. Could Sam Leavitt out of Minnesota be a guy that steps up? Could what's his name? Fernando Mendoza, who was with Cal last year and transferred to Indiana. Could he be a guy that steps up and becomes, one of those top quarterback prospects? And at the same time, could some of the guys we're talking about fall off? Could Arch Manning go back for another year at Texas, who Arch Manning's probably making a whole bunch of NIL money right now at Texas right now and gets to do whatever he wants. And if he feels like, I'm not the first overall pick, I'll go back in college for the year and keep improving myself. Garrett Nussmeier, does he play well? Cade Klubnik, Lenore Sellers, as you brought up, Nico Iamaleava, the guy that, was at Tennessee and then had the whole thing with NIL that blew up, and then now he's at UCLA. There's too many things to calculate for that. But that's at the same time why I think it's important to keep these options open, because let's say it breaks in the positive way. Let's say Arch Manning does come out, Lenore Sellers comes out, both of them have stellar seasons. So does Garrett Nussmeier, and maybe Drew Allar or Nico Iamaleava is in the class. And all of a sudden you have 5 guys that project to be, all of these guys could be first round picks. Everyone's talking about who's their guy, who's your guy, and everything like that. And now you don't have a second round pick to play with to add in with your trading packages, because you traded for another receiver, back during the season. That's where I think Omar Khan doesn't want to be. I think that they have intentionally stacked their deck with as many comp picks as they have as possible, not necessarily to be the pieces directly used to trade up, but to give them the ammunition to say, hey, you know what? Even if we trade first, a second, both our third and the Cowboys' third, and maybe a future first, even if we include all these early picks, we still have an extra third, 2 extra fourth, 2 extra fifth, and we can still fill out this draft class with young guys who can come in as role players with this quarterback, while also making a big trade to go get the pick, go get the quarterback that we really want. That's what I think the Steelers are going to be committed to in all of these trade talks where people are looking for something from them.
Well, and Chris, I think it's worth pointing out. Let's just say it doesn't work out with Aaron Rodgers. Let's say you go 6 and whatever.
11.
Let's say you win 6 games. I'm all the numbers in my head are messed up.
17 games messed us all up, man.
6 and 11, I guess, would be the number.
Yeah.
So let's say you go 6 and 11. You end up right where you were when you drafted Ben Roethlisberger 20 years ago. And let's say you pick around 10, 11, something like that, and you're able to get your guy quarterback, and you have all these picks. Well, now you're able to bolster your depth. You're able to get a bunch of lottery tickets in here. Some of them are going to turn out to be very solid players when you have that many picks to kind of throw at the wall. So that's probably part of the conversation for them as well, is that, this could be a way to alleviate a lot of these depth issues that we end up talking about at seemingly 3 or 4 or 5 positions every year. And doing that in a window, to your point about, a quarterback on a rookie deal, if you're not paying the quarterback much, you have room to maybe pay some of these guys to keep around him on a second contract. So, I think that's part of the equation too, is can you build the whole team and not give up too much for a quarterback if the situation plays out in your favor?
I think that right there, it's kind of making sure you're ready for that, because like you said, if things go sour with Aaron Rodgers, if Mike Tomlin has his first ever losing season, maybe you don't have to be as aggressive because you're right up in that mix right away. But that's the bottom line here, and it goes back to the question that we kind of touched on in the last segment. The Steelers are not in the score here window. They're not in the time period where they're going to be the team that should be aggressive and should be going and getting everything using everything they have to score right now. And this is the Super Bowl window. They're setting up that window. And so when you're setting up that window, you have to be a little bit more conservative. And I know Steelers fans are probably thinking, oh, it's been so long since we've tasted a chance of even being a Super Bowl contender. I get that, but you don't get there by taking shortcuts. And that's what happens to teams like the Jaguars, like the Browns, like the Cardinals, like the Panthers, teams that haven't been back to one in some years, and teams that keep kind of cutting themselves off because they keep stopping their regrowth short because they're trying to make the aggressive move to get ahead of things. Build naturally. That's been how the Steelers have been one of the crown jewel organizations of the NFL for the past 50 years, is building naturally and doing it that way. And yes, there's going to be some grinded out years, and you've had several of them in the past group of years for the Steelers. But I do think the Steelers have amassed a lot of young talent that you have reasonable expectations for them to start showing increased production and becoming a bigger part of the team. And if those things keep going in the right way, if what you're building continues to work, you could be in the position next year where you can get that quarterback and still have all the pieces around them. And then that could be the Super Bowl window that you're actually looking for to score with if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, and you can't unring the bell of the mistakes you've already made. You can't say it frustrates me when people talk about you haven't won a playoff win in how many years. What I try to say is you have to look at them in chunks, right? I think they overachieved in that late Ben Roethlisberger era of 2020. You win the division, coming off the injury. You lose 2019 because of the injury. Then 2020, you come back and win the division. Terrible performance in the playoffs. Then the next year, Ben, really fell off a cliff, and you had to live with that. Then you had a couple of years of Kenny Pickett, and that was a mistake. You can't chase after you've made those mistakes. You've got to start over and say, we're going to do this the right way from this point forward. And I think that's what they've done, especially in the draft. I think there's a lot to like about Omar Khan's drafts early on here. And if he's able to do that with, 10, 12, 13 picks instead of just 5 or 6, then I think you're really setting yourself up for a long-term future that's better than the period you've been living through.
Absolutely. He's Adam Bittner. I'm Chris Carter. You've been watching or listening to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like the city if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast. We'll be back Wednesday with more talking all things Steelers right here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.